Wow, it's awesome to be here. I'm back for my second year. Out of curiosity, who here has been here for 2 years in a row? This conference. Oh man, a lot of newcomers. It's exciting. Awesome. Excited to be here today. I'm going to talk a little bit about Atlassian and specifically how we've used Postman to scale our team collaboration practices. But before I get started, I'll talk a little bit more about myself, not for too long. I come from a software engineering background, been doing software engineering for about 10 plus years, private sector, government, typically dealing with very large sets of government data or satellite data. I recently transitioned into data engineering about 2.5 years ago at Atlassian. So now I currently manage 3 different teams of data engineers in Mountain View, Austin, Texas, and Bangalore, India, which is where Postman's engineering team is as well. On a personal note, I'm very into philanthropy. I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's my favorite hobby. I'm on the board of directors of San Francisco Kiwanis. So after this, if you want to talk to me about either technology or philanthropy, come find me. So Atlassian, I'm sure many of you are developers or QE or technical folks in the room, so you've probably heard of us. Products like Jira Software, Service Desk, Status Page, Trello, Confluence, Bitbucket, and a few more. Opsgenie as well. So Atlassian's mission is that we believe behind every great human achievement, there's a team. And our mission is to unleash the potential in every team. And what Abhinav just mentioned earlier is, Postman is doing very similar things. If you think about the reasons why you love Postman and a lot of the reasons why you're here today, it's not because what Postman lets you do as an individual, but more what it allows you to do amplified as a team. And I think that's one of the reasons that Postman found its way into Atlassian. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of how Postman came to Atlassian and like the journey we've taken as Postman has grown at Atlassian. So when I came to Atlassian in 2015, it was a very different company, a very fast-growing company. It had not gone public yet, but there was a lot of users of Postman, but not very many, but more and more as I walked around our offices, I could see the kind of Postman logo on each screen, or having one monitor have a collection up, or some sort of a GET request or a POST request. But it wasn't very collaborative, and everybody was using the free version. At that time, people probably weren't even aware of some of the sharing capabilities of Postman or some of the other features. It was very much an individual developer just wanted to move a little bit faster and didn't want to use curl. And so I'll paint a little picture. I'll tell a little bit of a story about how Postman started to grow. Initially, one of the reasons we started looking at Postman Pro and some of the more collaborative features is that we had a very, very large transformational project going on in our IT organization. We were essentially replacing a lot of our back office systems in preparation to go public and with the understanding that our company was about to kind of take off like a rocket ship. And so this was challenging because we had a lot of vendor systems, a lot of SaaS systems, a lot of consultants, both for the vendors and directly engaged with our company. And we had all these different teams working in Austin and San Francisco and Sydney. And so it became really difficult to take all the information from the subject matter experts and the engineers and to move it across all of these teams as we work for different time zones. A lot of times there would be just JSON snippets being pasted in some sort of an email or maybe like a chat message. If you can imagine thousands and thousands of lines of JSON being passed back and forth in an email chain, people saying, hey, this one didn't work, I got an error message. Someone saying, oh, you got to tweak this variable, your authentication was incorrect. It was very inefficient. And so we originally looked to use Postman. We got, I think, a 30-person license, and we decided, okay, well, this will be a better way to keep track of everything. Consultants, subject matter experts, solution architects, integration developers, build out your working prototypes of how these systems should work, and then share them with the engineers that might be in a different office so that they don't have to dig through all the documentation and spend all this time getting started. The solution architects were in San Francisco, and many of the developers were in Sydney, so there's very little overlap, especially in the winter months. And so this started to work, and we started to use this a little bit more, and then we started to work more closely with the vendors, and we asked them to improve their performance. So we started saying, okay, we have all these collections, and we have these test suites. Maybe we can use these to monitor the performance. You said you were going to improve this endpoint or dealing with this data entity. Are you actually improving it? And so we would track performance of requests. We also would look during peak batch times or large jobs to see if things were spiking, to look for weaknesses in their system. We were trying to evaluate what was the best architectural decision. And then on top of this, we had we had solution integrators come into these SaaS platforms and start configuring. And these configurations, like if some of you are familiar with things like Salesforce and other systems, you can just go right in the UI and it's great, it's easy. You make a change and everything works well, except for if you change some sort of an expected way that an API would interact with that data and then things break. So we also started using Postman to make sure that whatever the system integrators or the configurators would do wouldn't actually break what the engineers expected to happen or change a payload or suddenly not have a variable we expected. And so this went on for some time, and then we started to get a little bit more usage and more people wanted to use Postman. So people started to come and ask, hey, can I get access to Postman? Can my team get access to Postman? It started to slowly grow. So into 2017, we were seeing a lot of organic adoption. People essentially would say, hey, I heard you have Postman. Or someone says, I can come to you to get that shared collection. Can I get access to Postman? But still, most people were on free. I think about 90 people on maybe like 3 Postman Pro instances were not using free, and everyone else was using free. All right, so most people were still not discovering some of these collaboration features that Postman had offered, except for like IT teams, quality engineers, integration teams, and a little bit of our like developer community teams. And so as we started to see Postman grow and we started to see more of a need for Postman, we started to talk about, should we get more seats? Who owns this? Who should manage this? And so there was an effort that I spearheaded to kind of consolidate all of our users into one Postman Pro instance and then figure out how many people we would actually need on our instance. And much to, I think, the sales team at Postman's delight, I asked how many people wanted to have access, and about 260 people say they wanted access. So up from about 90 to 260 people overnight. And so this was a bit of an effort. And we finally, we figured out how many seats we got, we figured out how to configure it, we purchased it, we got through legal, and we expanded it to 260 seats. And since then, a lot has happened. Many new users, we've had Postman come and assist us with training. There's a lot of people kind of figuring out what they're trying to do and figuring out new ways to use Postman and extending and consolidating what they've done before. And so that takes us to where we are today. So Postman is widely adopted. We have our developer documentation for our customers on a website, developer.atlassian.com. You'll notice if you go on there that there's a Run in Postman button. This has been there for about maybe 2 years. But like Postman is such a big part of our dev loop that we actually automate all of our Swagger API documentations to generate these buttons. So this is kind of part of our deployment process. If we update our documentation, the Run in Postman button would be updated. About 25% of the monthly active users of Postman are using Postman Enterprise. So about 260, likely to go up to about 300 in the next month. There's about a total of 1,000 Postman monthly active users. So this is pretty large. I think Atlassian as a company, I think like the official numbers that were last given was about 3,600 people, growing like 30% year on year. So you can imagine about 60% of our staff was something I would consider, some people that I would consider to be like members of our technical staff. So there's a lot of runway for engineers at Atlassian to start using Postman. And more people are using Postman for collaboration. Now the go-to value add of Postman has been collaboration rather than simply, I don't want to use curl, which has been a great transformation. We have 40 team workspaces that have been created. Most new services now have some sort of a collection associated with them. And I think additionally, we're making between 30 and 40,000 API requests every month. Just with our users, we're creating 250 collections every month as well. So a lot of growth. And so Postman was kind of an interesting experiment. There's really no ideal way to use Postman, or no sort of mandated way you have to use Postman, or there's no single type of team. So we more or less just asked people if they wanted to use it. We didn't really instruct them on how to use it. So I think what's really interesting is actually just going in and discovering how our users are using Postman and what they're trying to solve with Postman today. So there's a couple patterns that I see come about what we're doing. Number one, as I mentioned, as a company, we're growing by about 30% employees every year. I just mentioned that's about 3,600 employees is the last reported numbers. You can imagine how many people we had to hire last year to get to that number if that was 30% growth. That is a lot of new people. The IT, HR onboarding is not the most difficult part about bringing on technical staff. We've got just over 700 microservices, a lot of different teams, and a lot of new people. So how do you actually take that burden off of engineers to train the new staff and get them productive? So people are using Postman as a quick start. Developers are often already using Postman to do their collections, to do their API development, especially early on before something goes to production. And so these collections, they can be used to onboard team members faster. Also, as we have 40 team workspaces. Now this is kind of becoming a standardized place of discovery. We definitely have official documentation and there's READMEs, but beyond that, Postman seems to be a little bit more effective if you're an engineer to get started. Also, driving collaboration. Again, we have remote teams, we have distributed teams, we have a lot of different types of teams. Postman's kind of becoming that hub where it's easy to share things that are useful for developers. Another emerging pattern is empowering integrators. Now, there's a specific type of integrator that I like to call the unknown integrator. And I'll give an example. So you have service A, and this service is in charge of accounts. It's a simple REST CRUD microservice. And you have service B, that's a contact REST CRUD microservice. Each of these services probably has a Swagger doc or some sort of a documentation, probably has a README, probably has instructions how to run these services independently. Now, if you want to do something with both of these services, you'll notice that each team building these services is really only focused on the good documentation of each one of those services. What if you want to use them together to take the accounts and the contacts and to draw some sort of insight and then drive some sort of a change or trigger some sort of workflow in another system? There's really not a lot of documentation that will span these teams. But in Postman, a lot of times the collections are really focused on these type of things rather than just repeating the Swagger documentation of a service. So it can be very useful to find things that allow people to chain services together that might not be documented in an individual service. Another is encouraging reuse. I think, as I mentioned, we have hundreds and hundreds of microservices, and we have thousands of employees. Some of you who may work at large companies would know, people sometimes just want to build a service by the weekend, and they're not necessarily going to go and look and see if that service already exists, or if something could be extended, or they could collaborate to extend a service. I found many times that people reach out to me and my team, and they say, hey, we noticed you have this service, and we took a look at the docs, and we were able to test it out in one of the lower environments. We tested it out with Postman. Do you think this service could be adapted to fit our need? And a lot of times the answer is yes. Sometimes it's no. And they need to build their own service. But in the times when people actually take a look to see if, hey, we can extend something or reuse something, or hey, can I actually figure out how to get started without having to build something new, we're seeing a lot of gains there. Another is reducing the time to integrate. I think if you imagine how long it can take to get a new developer effective, or even an existing developer with a new service, potentially poor documentation, they just want to see how the API interacts. They just want to make sure they actually have the right authentication, the right access. We're finding Postman is really reducing that time. Someone asks, hey, I need help getting this service. Okay, well, here's the README. Here's the Postman collection. Let me know if you run into any problems. I think that's a much more effective way to get them started. And it's also like the developers prefer it. People don't want to always ask for people's time when they're new. And so I want to take kind of both of those emerging patterns and talk a little bit about a problem and how we solved it using those two things. So at Atlassian, we have our own internal documentation standards outside of Postman. And we have our own tools, and we have our own services and environments. So how do we take those tools and extend them with Postman? So for one example, on my left, you'll notice we have something called DAC, developer.atlassian.com. This is what our API documentation looks like on the left-hand side. And then, if you look, when you download that collection in Postman using the Run in Postman button, you'll see that the experience is similar to our website as it is when you go into the Postman collection. So we're starting to take these, when we build out these collections and these Run in Postman buttons, we're actually starting to make sure that it matches our experience on our website. It may seem small, but to an engineer, the way you just looked at the documentation and the way that that's now presented in Postman becomes very intuitive. It really lowers the barrier to entry and reduces mental effort. On top of this, we're making it even easier for people to have we're building tools to take Swagger documentation and create these collections in a way that makes it very easy for people to use. I know sometimes when you import a collection from Swagger, it doesn't always happen the way you expect it to happen. So we're spending a lot of time in the back end to make sure that we can actually automate this so each team doesn't have to kind of learn this later when someone says, hey, I couldn't quite get it to work when I import it into Swagger. Another thing we're doing is we're starting to build tools to help extend the capabilities into Postman. we have our own microservices environment, and each one of these has their own authentication methods and different environments in different regions, and there's a little bit of interaction you need to do to actually, from your local machine, connect to an environment, say like your staging environment or your integrated development environment. There's actually effort to do that. We have a lot of security in the middle, and so it can become quite difficult to do this. So people in the past would run, curl commands to get an authentication key, paste it into Postman, hope they could make all the requests before it expired in 60 seconds, right? Things like that were quite painful, and so they would draw people out of Postman and back to the command line, which would be less collaborative. So about 2 or 3 weeks ago, one of the engineers on our developer documentation team created a tool called PostMonkey. And so this was a simplified way to actually allow people to inject custom scripts inside Postman and load them as variables. If you're interested, it's up on NPM. You can take a look at it. And so we kind of combined what we've done with customizing some of our imports from Swagger to Postman collections, and then some of our customized scripting, and we took it one step further. We built, this is not an open source product, but we built a small server that you can run in the background that will proxy authentication from the Postman pre-request scripts, hit this service, and manage all of your authentication with our security service and our key management servers. So you go to our documentation page, which is both for our external customers. It's now actually a place for our internal customers to get started as well. They press the One in Postman button. They download the shared set of environment variables for all of our microservices infrastructure, and they press send, and they're actually going to get a response. And they're not going to know about all the kind of witchcraft and magic you're going to have to do to deal with 2 different custom methods of service authentication that we have at Atlassian, right? So this has really been incredible. And so you can imagine what would take someone days to figure out and have to understand all this bespoke stuff. Now they find the service on their first day, they download the docs, they press run, and all of a sudden they can actually see how a service is operating and staging. Right? So it can also be quite useful for doing production maintenance and other things like that, where it's actually very difficult to get keys and manage that as well. We're doing a lot more, and some of this stuff I think we're going to like kind of give back and put into our public-facing documentation. But at the moment, it's been very useful internally. And with that, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for listening to me talk about scaling team collaboration with Postman.